Hi, this is international psychic medium Susan Schueler. Welcome to my show, Midlife Conversations. Today's guest is Fran Knap. Hi, Fran.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. I know today this is probably going to be an emotional topic for you, and I do appreciate your coming, and telling our viewers about what you're going to tell us about. Now, you and I met several years ago because you were involved with the Alex Rice Peace Park. Now, I have to ask now for our viewers, Alex Rice was my niece, and she was tragically hit by a drunk driver while she was coming home for work on her longboard. And so I have to ask you, Fran, how did you get involved in this? Because I know you were a big part in having this skate park in her memory built.
Yes, as my recollection, we had reached out to the town of Amherst to build a skate park because at the time, both of my boys, I want to say Frank was maybe 17 or, no, well, because he was a little older than Alex, maybe 19 or actually no, not 18 or 19, and Rob would have been younger, so maybe 15 and 19. And throughout school, they always wanted to have a skate park, or they wanted an appreciation and respect for skateboarding, which was never done in our area. Unlike you in California, where skateboarding is rampant, and my children would have loved to, which I'll tell you that later about my older son, always wanted to be in California for the skateboarding. So I decided one day, and it actually was right when my son moved to California. He moved to Mammoth Lakes to pursue his dream. And I said, as I was sitting there, you raise your two children, you've got this time. I said, you know what, I'm going to write a letter to the town of Amherst and see if they would ever consider having a skate park. I recall it was the month of October, and I actually received a phone call from Mary Diana, the recreational department head. And she said, we'd like to meet with you. We're considering what you had sent in your letter about a skate park. It's been years that we have had requests. So at that same time, right around that time, maybe 6 months after Alex had passed away, and Mary Diana had brought us together in a way, brought Tammy and I together to pursue. I remember one of the first events was a brick, or it was something with the youth department, and it was a demo day, and we had just bought Fat Man, if I recall, as well, and we met at the recreation department and the youth department, and that's when I recall meeting Tammy for one of the first times. And we did a little demo. We brought some, features, as they call them, for the youth to skate on. And then they created a ring of paper, if I recall, the students or children that were there. And that was the first time that we had met. Soon after that, my older son, was injured, hit by a car in front of the store. It was probably just a year after we had opened up. And he had been back from California. And I recall going to Sheridan Surgical, where Tammy also worked with Alex. In my understanding, Alex also worked at Sheridan Surgical.
Mhm.
And the owner, who I also know from, my father used to work at Sheridan Surgical back in 1977.
Oh, wow.
So when I went in there and spoke to the owners, they said, well, Tammy is here, and I know that you'd probably want to talk to her. So that was another second time. So for whatever reason, our paths kept meeting. And then after that, we met with couple other board members, and we created the Alex Rice Peace Park Foundation.
And honestly, it is, it's like when you see the finished product now, it's a beautiful skate park. It's really state of the art.
Yes,
I know I was very, very impressed when I saw it. And
Yes.
I live out in Venice Beach, and we've got some really great ones here.
Yes.
So I know that was, you were huge in that. That was just a lovely, lovely thing. So I have to ask you though now, and I haven't mentioned this, you own Fat Man board shop. So now
Correct.
with board shop, now, does that mean like all kinds of boards? Like what kind of boards?
Yes, skateboards, longboards, snowboards, big into the snowboarding. That's probably our biggest season. But now all of a sudden skateboarding, because part
Okay.
of our a small little skate shop, we moved, and then we actually put an indoor skate shop, like in little mini indoor skate park,
Oh,
like a demo area skate park.
fun.
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
it.
So so that has been, it was only in the last year during COVID, we were able to get that done.
I love that. Now I have to ask you, were you athletic when you were younger? Did you grow up skiing? Did you grow up skating, that kind of stuff?
I was a team sport athlete, more, baseball, basketball. That's what my family did. And then I met my husband, who was more of an extreme sports. That's the way he was raised in his family. So when we met, we started skiing. Snowboarding wasn't even around when my husband started.
Okay.
It started back maybe 30 years ago.
Wow. That makes me feel really old. Okay.
Well, when I look back, you're not kidding. I remember when he first started at Kissing Bridge, which is the smaller resort here. There's Holiday Valley and Kissing Bridge. And he was just bruised, but he was determined to snowboard because it was something new and innovative and he was going to learn it. So, but when we first met, we were skiing.
Okay. And I should point this out to our viewers. Fran is from Western New York, actually the Buffalo area. And clearly that's where I grew up. And clearly we get a lot of snow out in those neck of the wood. So that's like a perfect place to have a board shop. So now I have to ask you, I know you've mentioned your two boys. So did your boys, since your husband was kind of an extreme sports person, did your boys start snowboarding and things like that when they were real young?
Yes, they did. That was one of the first things they did. My husband, again, was not team sports. He just was an avid skateboarder. So I just remember my boys, even with skateboarding, the first things they did, one of the first things they did get as gifts were a skateboard. So they would sit on their rear ends and they just, he would push them around the neighborhood or whatever. And then it just went on from there. But yes, and then as far as the skiing, we were told to wait until their legs were stronger and developed. So we had them out at the age of 3, both of them.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And
wow.
Robbie actually snowboarded quicker than Frank because by the time Robbie snowboarded, it was much more accepted.
Right.
And then, so rather than skiing, he just pretty much went right to snowboarding. Both started out skiing, but snowboarding dominated, after a year of skiing.
Wow.
Went
and
to
how many
snowboarding.
years are there between the boys?
5.
Frank's the older one, right?
Correct.
Okay.
He's 30, going to be 30 this year, and Rob will be 25. But right now they're 24 and 29.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then now I know that they both became professional snowboarders, correct?
That's correct.
How does somebody do that?
Well, because they were Frank started out, again, Frank was really well-rounded. He team sports and the extreme sports. And because he was around with us for 5 years before Robbie, that he did all of it. We got him in everything we possibly could as new parents would do. But it was skiing, skateboarding and snowboarding, skiing, the outdoor activities that really was what impressed him the most. So we used to go out on Saturday nights at Holiday Valley. That was our night to ski. We dedicated Saturday nights at the end, and it was a night pass because that's what was affordable to us.
Right.
Skiing is not necessarily cheap. It's a little bit expensive in this area. So we would go out on a Saturday and we would start at 4:00, but they were ending their day at Holiday Valley. So some of the events at the end of the day were competitions. So we would just watch in awe of all these different skiers, and mostly skiers at the time than snowboarders, and how great they were doing. So it seemed like every week Frank would say, how can I get on the snowboard team? What can I do? So I decided to make a phone call and I ended up hooking up on the snowboard team. And that's where it really all took off.
So how old was he when he got on his first team?
I would say he was about 12.
Wow, that's awesome.
Anywhere between 12 and 14, but I think it was 12. Yes. So from there we rented, we ended up, my husband and I began, because of affordability, we ended up joining the safety patrol at Holiday Valley. If you work at Holiday Valley, you get free passes. So the first year, Bob and I received passes. The second year, you get one for yourself and one for a child. So between the two of us, all 4 of us had passes. So you still had to pay separate for the snowboard team, but it allowed us to get out there affordably. And then we rented a cottage out there for 5 years. So it was that's when we just got into it.
All right.
Heavily.
So,
yeah.
Now,
so every weekend.
And you didn't own Fat Man Board Shop at
We
this
did not.
point. When
No,
did you? How did you guys come to own that?
It was in 2010, because now it's our 11th season. So 2010. So it was about 5 years we were on safety patrol. And then my son, Frank, wanted to move out to California. So the compromise was that he was going to go to college. He was going to get a 2-year degree, Coso Community College out in Mammoth Lakes. But that was really one of the first devastating things for me, is my son couldn't go an hour away. He had to go across the country. I didn't see him for 10 months. That first year was very difficult. So we dropped it. So our process in doing that is we drove across country. No, we flew into San Diego and then we drove up to Mammoth because we'd never been to California before. So one thing I will say about my children, they brought us out of New York because we probably never would have done all that. Right. So we flew into San Diego, drove up there, stayed at hotels or whatever. That was my first experience in Venice Beach. And then he got him settled into college. He also worked at Wave Rave Snowboard Shop, which is the biggest snowboard shop out in California.
Wow. And then
he went to school, and that's where it's spectacular. Yeah, we've been out a couple times. I would have liked to have gone out more. It's just beautiful, and the skiing and the snowboarding. So it's actually there that Frank ended up meeting a lot of professional snowboarders and
Okay.
competed a little bit more extensively out there. But
Now,
prior to that, he had competed in what's called USASA national events, and that's where he received some recognition. Both of my children in New York here received most of their recognition at Holiday Valley and through USASA national snowboard events. Both of them were invited to competitions every year, basically since they started snowboarding. We just couldn't afford to send them all the time. The
right.
high point of my older son was when he was able to go to nationals in Tahoe. And that's where he fell in love with California. And he would sit in bed at night. At the age of 12 to 14, I would go in there. You have the old DVD recorders. I'd have to tell him, Frank, go to bed. And he'd be up watching DVDs of snowboarders, all professional
Oh,
snowboarders from the time he started snowboarding. So
wow.
that's where it all began.
Now switching gears a little bit, in May of 2019, I'm correct? It was May?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, May
Now,
1st.
your younger son, Rob, had an accident. Would you tell us about this and everything that kind of, like, let's just say played up to this?
Yes. So Rob decided to go to Colorado. So he didn't want to go to California like his brother. He wanted to go to Colorado. And the reason he wanted to go to Colorado, I think one of them is that through Fat Man, we had, what do you want to call, what do they call 'em? Conventions, the snowboard conventions. So one year we were out there, one of our first years in business. We said, we'll take the whole family. We'll go to one of they have their annual shows. So we went to Colorado. It was Copper Mountain. And that's where Rob ended up meeting the owner of Hovland Snow Skates. And he loves snow skating. Snow skating is different than
Yeah, I was
skateboarding
just
and
like, tell us what
snowboarding.
snow skating is. I
Yeah,
don't know
it's
this.
a combination of both, really. You're not strapped in. With a snowboard, you're actually strapped in. With skis, you're strapped in. With snow skating, it's actually a skateboard on snow. They've changed a lot even since, and even going back farther than that. When my boys were 5 and 10, we actually drove to Canada because it's the only place that sold them. And we bought the first Burton Junkyards, which was a snow skate a long time ago before Hovland had their snow skates. So I think Rob just had that in the back of his mind, just loved it. And snowboarding, because he started so young, got a little old for him. He wanted to try something new. So when we went out to Copper Mountain, he met the owner and he said, and he saw the snow skates and said, can I try it? And Dan from Hovland is the one that actually met with Rob after his injury, one of the first people that came to visit him at the hospital. So he again got him introduced. Rob went up to him and said, I want to try one of those, because he was telling me the story about what happened. And he gave him the snow skate, and it was just, again, he loved it ever since then. So then we went back to New York and he kept in contact with Hovland. They would send him free snow skates. So once he had the snow skates, he would try to get them to use them around here. Western New York does not accept snow skating because with snowboarding, you actually have a binding and you're strapped in. At our resorts here, you are not allowed to do that. So in Colorado, and I'm not even sure California, but definitely at Copper Mountain in the Colorado resorts, he was able to snow skate.
So
So
how was he able to get good at it if he wasn't able to do it then?
he would just in and around here in our area, he would find places to go that were free, and he would just practice as much as he could.
Wow.
And then in 2018, he decided to go, end of 18 in October, he decided to renovate a vehicle, renovated a truck, drove out there. He also has a welding degree. Rob went to vocational, didn't want to go to college, went for a vocational degree in welding. So he started welding and said, you know what, I'm going to take this out to Colorado. I'm going to get a job and I'm going to, snowboard in the winter. So within the first week of getting into Colorado, he ended up getting a job as a welder. And then he worked there. And when winter hit, that was October, like November, December, that's when the snow really hit. And he kind of said, I'm not going to weld right now. I'm going to snow skate and snowboard. So he did that and then was invited to go to what's called Super Park. They have an annual event in the snowboard community. For many years, my older son went, and it was in California at Mammoth Lakes. This particular year, it was in Seattle, Washington at Crystal Mountain. And then so he flew there and then had the event, was doing exceptional the first day, and I believe it was the second day that he had the injury. So, and was going off of a jump. Anybody is out there that understands what snowboarding is, and they called features and jumps, went off, and my recollection, it was about a 60-foot jump. he had successfully landed several. On that particular one where he was injured, he actually hit the wall. And that's when he
Wow.
fell and was injured.
Now, when this happened, and I'm sure, did they immediately contact you? Did somebody contact your husband? I mean, how did you learn that this happened?
So even that particular week, I had told my son, I said, he had told us, we weren't even, he had told us he was going to, shortly before he told us he was going there, because I was going on a trip with my mom. I said, my mother was newly divorced. My mom's was 79 years old, going on 80. Her husband had served with divorce papers after 30 years of marriage. And we said, Mom, it's almost your 80th birthday. We're going on a cruise. So my sister and I took my mom on a cruise.
So you were out of town when this happened.
I was out of town at the airport, and I'll never forget my face because she received a call from my husband. He actually received a call from, I think it was my son Frank, because the people that were snowboarding out there knew my son because he'd been out at those events. So I think they called him. My husband then talked to somebody that was. It was after that he called me.
Okay.
I actually called my sister because they probably knew I wasn't gonna be able to handle it.
Right.
So I remember going, because we were delayed on our flight because my mom is in a walker, and we couldn't get the connection quick enough. So we missed our flight. So that whole day, we missed the flight. I remember we're driving from one section of the airport to the other, and that's when my sister received the phone call, and her face just looked shocked. So it was after that, then we were at the airport, received the phone call. I was able to talk to my son briefly before he went into surgery. Talk to the surgeon, talk to him.
So,
but he told me he immediately knew he was paralyzed when he fell.
wow.
He knew it. He was conscious.
So
but
when
knew
you
it.
say he's paralyzed, where is he paralyzed from? Where was he at this point?
He was paralyzed from the shoulders down, and pretty much been the same, but from the shoulders down, he has some, at that point, no, he was completely, basically from the neck down. And then after surgery, so he had surgery on the front of his neck and the back of his neck. So his diagnosis at the time when he went to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Washington. He was airlifted there. And then amazing surgeons said that I don't recall the exact terminology of the surgeries that he had, but spent 2 weeks in a Harborview Medical Center in ICU after the surgery. And he had said that he has a spinal cord injury considered C5 complete. So when he was
Which
at Harborview,
means what? What does that?
Meaning that for insurance purposes, it's complicated. I mean, there's some hope for miracles, but when you're complete or incomplete, you're less, the diagnosis is complete, you're less likely to have anything more than what you have during your injury. Incomplete, there's hope for improvement. For insurance purposes, a diagnosis of complete is better insurance and disability because they automatically give you disability if you're able to have it, where it's more of a challenge if you're considered incomplete. Okay. So financially, that was a better plan, a better diagnosis for Rob financially. Okay. Luckily for Rob, he didn't go to college, and he had the welding background and was able to get disability because of it.
Oh, okay. Wow. And how old was he when this actually happened?
22.
22 years old. Oh my God.
He's only 22. Yeah.
Ooh, okay. So now, does this mean he can move his neck? Does this mean he's able to, how's his movement?
So one of the things it's kind of confused because we're not sure what allowed him to do a little bit more. Every spinal cord injury is different. So when somebody tells you even Rob's diagnosis spinal cord injury C5, every C5 is different. Some might have a right hand, a left hand, but with Rob, he has tenodesis where he can use his hand. He can grab things. He can grab his hands. He cannot feel his fingers, but he can grab things.
Okay, so
he can move his shoulders.
Plural? Both
yes,
of them?
Both hands. Yep. Okay. And he can raise his shoulders. Okay. And he is able to feed himself. He cannot transfer himself. So we transfer him from a wheelchair to bed and things like that. But he's communicative. He had no, brain damage at all. So he verbalizes very well.
Now, and I know that, like we've talked about before we got on air today, that he did live in Colorado for a while, because I know that the family was commuting back and forth for a time, correct?
Yes. So after Harborview Medical Center, they did the surgery 2 weeks. And then after, it was pretty much exactly 2 weeks, and he was flown and that was even a process. Getting him accepted into Craig Hospital is not easy. You have to have the right insurance, you have to have financing, you have to have funding. There's a young woman around here recently who was injured, and they had a fundraiser just to be able to get her. I'm not sure what her insurance background was. He had to be interviewed. They actually had somebody come from Craig Hospital to Seattle View Medical Center to make sure he was a good candidate for rehabilitation. So it's not
So
really
what
even
would,
that part.
if I can interrupt you, what would make someone a good candidate for rehabilitation? In other words, a certain mindset or?
I think a mindset and financial.
Okay.
I would say mindset, financial. Those would be, yeah, I would say two key things.
And
So
this is like heartbreaking when you realize like the financial ramifications of something like this.
absolutely,
Oh my gosh.
absolutely. Just then, so you mentioned the flying. So once he finally was able to get into Craig Hospital, my husband and I flew back and forth for the 3 months that he was there. So we basically did not see each other for 3 months because he would take time. I did take family leave, but then I didn't want to take all of it. Again, my health insurance my employer and my health insurance is what, in my opinion, got Rob into Craig Hospital. So I
Okay.
could not afford to lose my job.
Okay. And
Even
just
to this
tell the
day.
audience what it is that you do work wise, aside from having family and board shop.
Yeah, I am a paralegal in family wealth planning for over 25 years.
Okay.
That's,
And they helped you to get what you needed to like point you in the right direction or?
no, just because of the insurance. So I have Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. If I didn't have insurance, you probably wouldn't be able to go to Craig Hospital. But the firm also did arrange a fundraiser at the same time uh, for Rob for our expenses to travel, which was amazing. Right away, the partner in our department reached out and said, Fran, what do you need? What can we do for you? And she started a fundraiser immediately.
And
So
that is truly the wonderful thing about the people in Western New York.
yes,
I
you
mean,
are
they
right.
are just beautiful, beautiful people. I mean, very, very salt of the earth. They'll do anything they can to help each other.
Yes, you
Yeah.
are absolutely correct. I don't know what I would have done without the community, friends and people. It just everybody that reached out. People I can't even people that I knew here that reached out that knew people in Seattle, Washington. I had my older son's fiance has an aunt that has a house in Seattle, Washington. She visited me in the hospital. Her and a friend. They took me out on Mother's Day. I mean, brought me
Oh,
food. It was remarkable. The people across the country because of the connections in Western New York. It was
right.
amazing. Yeah.
Now I have to ask this with your son. I mean, he's got all of these physical challenges now. How is he holding up emotionally? Because especially for somebody who's clearly, I mean, like just a go-getter, he had to be tons of ambition, just really much like to move his body. How is
It's
this? How is?
devastating. I'm not even going to lie for 1 second that it's not. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people that have these injuries, it is somebody that has a recreational sports. Just it's devastating. It's been very difficult the first 6 months. There's a lot that was difficult. Suicide, didn't want to live. Still difficult challenges with that. But one thing through the High Fives Foundation is they reached out to us the day or two after Rob was injured. And they want to get athletes like Rob back out doing what they used to do in a different way.
Mhm.
So if it hadn't been for them, I don't know if Rob would have had that mindset to know that I can continue on,
Mhm.
with these sporting activities that I liked to do, but again, differently. So they helped finance Rob in Colorado through his apartment and let him to stay there. And then when he came back to New York, they financed an electric bicycle for him. So it's not easy to get him in it because
Right.
it takes a few of us to get him in. But when he's in, he loves it. It gives him that adrenaline. I think it's a lot about that adrenaline rush that he had,
Mhm.
prior to his injury. He still has now. That hasn't changed. His personality was difficult that first year, but it is back. I mean, the things he did before, he still wants to do. He still has this. He loves to buy and sell things, like whether it was motorcycles before the injury, and now he renovated a van so that he can travel with his girlfriend. So one thing about people that are disabled, another person that I follow that I mentioned before, I mentioned Cole and Charisma, their site, but there's another gentleman we met in Craig Hospital, Impact Overland. He renovated a vehicle, similar injury to Rob, is completely independent. So one of the things you asked me, I think in the beginning, is the hardest thing for Rob is losing his independence.
Right.
Having to ask people to do everything for him all day long is very difficult.
Mhm.
One of the things we want to work on this year is his independence. And so this Impact Overland renovated a vehicle in Colorado and travels across the country. Even went to South America last year. So that is what Rob's goal. This Friday, he's going for his driver's license. So we'll
Ah,
see in an adaptive vehicle, of course,
right,
at some point. That
right,
process isn't going to happen overnight. It'll be another year before we
right.
do anything about it, but it's a start to him being independent.
Right. And I know I'd mentioned this to you. My sister had me look at right when he had had the accident. And I just remember seeing him like in all of these weird like types of machines. And I was like, he's still going to be a daredevil. I'm like,
Yeah.
I said, he's going to be amazing. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just, and that's why when you were sending me some pictures that I'm sure we're going to be showing during this, it was like, this is only like the mustard seed. This is only just the little taste of where this kid's going to go. Cause he is just so full of
Yes.
adventure.
Yes, and he still is. And then we're working on the process of getting him a sit ski. He was out doing, there's a Lounsbury program at Holiday Valley. They call it Lounsbury for adaptive skiing. He was out a couple times last year. We have a couple reserved for this year. So we're hoping that we can do that and eventually get him his own sit ski so we don't have to rely on, it's very difficult for us as a family who used to ski 50 times plus a year to be down to less than 5.
Right.
It's been very hard for us. As I watch
Right.
the snow fall, it's really one of the hardest things for us as a family.
Right.
But
No,
we do believe we'll get back at one of the things about a spinal cord injury, though, is body temperature. Rob can't adjust and monitor his body temperature, so he's always cold. So
oh,
that's a hard part about getting back out and
okay.
adapting to the weather. So we'll see how
Right.
that goes. He had a little hard time last year. I'm anxious to see how he does this year.
Now I have to ask you. Now we talked about hit the physical ramifications for him and the emotional ramifications for him. What about as a parent, the physical ramifications for you as well as the emotional ramifications? Is there a support system? I mean, is he seeking counseling? Are you seeking counseling? Is there a support group?
The one good thing that Craig is that they had a counselor. He was getting counseling. But when he came back here, he's very stubborn. He did not want to continue counseling. I tried. We've been to a couple different, we actually went through, it's called Winship Vocational, I believe, rehabilitation or something. So that helped Rob decide, well, try to decide if he's going to go to college or if what he's going to do. We tried college for a semester. It's not for him. He was a welder by trade, hands on. So he decided to take the semester off. Went last semester, did fairly well, but it's not for him. So that was a part of counseling. Should he go for continue ongoing counseling? Absolutely. We all should go for family counseling. I try to push it. I have very stubborn men in our family. And unfortunately, I personally do. I reached out for meditation. Like I'm all about, but prior to Rob's injury, I'm avid exercise. I actually just bought myself a bicycle to get an indoor bicycle just to continue because that's therapy for me.
Mhm.
I will say this is definitely something I never thought I would have such a traumatic life. Exercise and getting out and walking would help me with needing to be here with him. It's very difficult sometimes to even get a walk to get on this indoor bicycle.
Right.
It's because the demands are there. And then COVID hit and I can't even get caregivers to come and help.
Ugh,
The reason my son moved back from Colorado is I was getting calls at 2 o'clock in the morning. Caregiver doesn't show up, 2 o'clock in the morning, Colorado time, our time. So him 11, 12 o'clock. So you imagine that's what happens when you're on your own. So my heart breaks for anybody that has to go through this that doesn't have family because I cannot imagine
So let
going
me
through
ask
this.
you this kind of leading into that. You're 2 years into this. Not quite, but almost. What would you suggest? What pearls of wisdom would you be able to give someone else who maybe is experiencing a loved one who's in a similar situation?
If they can help them find a place other than a nursing home. Because I cannot tell you how many people said to me in the beginning, I don't know how you're going to do this, Fran. How are you and Bob going to do this? Your marriage is going to suffer. I've had somebody say, you are not going to make it if he does not go into a nursing home. How do you put a 22-year-old child, in my mind, into a nursing home? I couldn't do it.
No.
So I had a lot of conversations with Mary Lynn Barnhard. Her daughter, Natalie, was injured 15 years ago, spinal cord injury like Rob, is a physical therapist. A piece of weight equipment fell on her. She is the one that's building Motion Project, which will be the first spinal cord center in Western New York for
Wow.
rehabilitation. Is remarkable. Should have been built last year, but then COVID hit. It will be completed this year, and it will be like a Craig Rehabilitation Center, state of the art. And I so look forward to that. But my conversations with her, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I remember being in the stairway at Craig Hospital. We kept trying to extend Rob's stay there. I was in the stairwell. They're telling me, well, he's got to leave in a couple days. I mean, what do you do? What do you do
Mm.
after a couple months? I was speechless. I was crying, hysterical, didn't have an apartment for him to go to. So I started driving around Colorado. Have no idea Colorado, the area, because he wanted, there's a trolley that you can take if you're within the trolley or the bus line. That's one great thing about Colorado. They're accessible for somebody in a wheelchair. So finally, God willing, I found an apartment that was accessible for him. And that's when we moved him in. But the recommend to whatever you could do to keep them with you, because they don't want to live as it is. So how do you put them in a place where they can't? And it's not easy. They're angry. They will yell and scream, but you just take it because they don't have anywhere else to go, nobody else to yell at.
Right.
So that one of the main things is give them a place to live, let them, and then even moving back from Colorado, then we realized it wasn't going to work in Colorado. Because I was getting these phone calls. He was upset. You can't not have somebody show up when they're dependent on it.
Right.
So it was the decision that Rob, you need to come home. So again, our house, we had estimates of over $150,000 to renovate it. How can you renovate? We've had fundraisers. We had fundraisers. The one that Philip Lytle helped me with, and then my brother-in-law ran a fundraiser. And even with all that money, it's a start, but it's not $150,000 to renovate a house.
Right.
So there was a weekend that my husband and I were both back here in Western New York after traveling back and forth to Colorado. And we had an old neighbor of ours, a friend of Rob's father, came, and we just happened to run into him. And he said, there's a house for sale on a court off of our street with an elevator. That's for sale. Not just there, but that's for sale. So my husband also does real estate. He's very multitasking. And so he called the listing agent. It was under contract. They said they helped us make it work so a week later, they signed a contract with us. We bought the house, sold our house within a month. So within 2 months, bought and sold a house that it literally has an elevator.
Wow.
The ramps and the extras, the way to get into the house. We paid $100,000 more than what our house sold for, but it was $50,000 less than what we would have put into a house. It still wouldn't have been at the house that we have now. So and we still renovated a bathroom. There was a walk-in shower, but it was on the first floor. So we had to, use the fundraiser money to renovate a bathroom for him. Right. But it was a miracle and remarkable. And then my sister and I flew out to Colorado, drove back in a U-Haul, because it was my son's idea to adopt 2 puppies after his injury with his girlfriend. So we drove a U-Haul back, Thelma and Louise, my sister, drove back. And it was looking back, as devastating as all that. I have to look at the bright moments. However, if you also want to know anything challenging about this, is flying with somebody who is, has a spinal cord injury. Right. So I'm not sure at what point you want to talk about that, because then when we drove back, my son at the same time had to fly. So as we were packing up his apartment to come back, I have a call from his girlfriend at the airport. You have to come to the airport. They won't let him on the flight. So he was allowed on the flight at Frontier Airlines. And then my son refused. Again, his stubbornness was still there even after injury, said, I'm not getting off this flight. He was trained at Craig Hospital what you do on a flight. You have a gate belt, and apparently not every airline, they went back and the pilot actually called. We actually were dealing with a pilot at this time. They refused to let him fly, and he refused to get off the plane. They called security. They were going to arrest him. So it was a very kind police officer that decided to escort my son off the plane. And we finally agreed that yes, as long as we get him another flight, and they did. Southwest.
And now, why were they able to get him another flight? Was it on a different airline?
Yes, through Southwest. Okay. So they ended up covering a hotel the next day. We actually had to stay overnight in a hotel with 2 puppies, and so I'm packing up. My sister and I had to pack up the U-Haul, drive. We ended up staying at the airport, the hotel, and then got my son the next day, which we weren't even sure he was going to be able to fly, because now he's sick.
So
He couldn't handle the emotion and the
right.
physical of being on a plane. And, he has certain things that have to be done. He has to go to the bathroom, and that's a
Right.
process in itself. It just, with that part of it was a nightmare.
Now, are there certain airlines that you would say are more user friendly for someone in this situation?
The only airline in our limited experience in the last year and a half is Southwest,
Really?
who was fantastic. So that's a concern for us in flying.
Of
We're
course.
not sure. We're supposed to be going on a trip. There was a couple things we were supposed to do. My son, through High Fives, was offered a trip through to Colorado this year, and even a surf trip in California last year. But COVID hit and we couldn't go.
Right.
We had scheduling airlines is difficult now because it can only be through Southwest.
Right.
So far in our experience, and I'm hesitant to. You have to be very specific because you've got a wheelchair, and the process of all that. At another flight we took, because Rob also had a stem cell done. He went to New Jersey while he was in Colorado. We flew out to New Jersey, had him flown, and we drove to New Jersey. So another remarkable thing that somebody did for us is gave us a van. So Natalie Barnhart through Motion Project gave us her van when she upgraded a one. So we drove that to New Jersey, met Rob there. But when he got to New Jersey, they broke his wheelchair. So what does somebody do who's dependent on a wheelchair, and they shove it in underneath wherever they do? It's lack of respect for that person. And we sat another couple hours in the airport while they got a loaner. I mean, how many places are open to get a wheelchair, in the middle of the night?
And this is
So,
something, as a parent, you have to become such an advocate in
very much
everything
so.
that you're doing. Oh my God, it's got to
Yes.
be exhausting.
What I learned through this is I have a lot of respect for people that have to go this from birth or that ever has to go through this. So granted, my son was 22 years old, but realizing what people have to go through with accessibility,
Mhm.
wheelchair accessible, anybody that parks in a handicap spot that shouldn't be, if you park somewhere, that make sure that there's a cutout point, because we can walk, but he cannot go there with his wheelchair. It's a big deal.
Right.
It's a big
Right.
deal.
And it shows you how much we as healthy you take for
Take
granted.
for granted. Absolutely.
Totally take for granted. Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I thank you so much for giving us all of this information. Is there like a website that you became acquainted with about spinal injuries that sort of helped you? Anything like that?
Yeah, I think websites are great. And I also look at people's stories. I mean, again, I will highly recommend Cole and Charisma. It's an interabled couple that are now married, and they've enlightened us, and they do a lot of videos and just show there's a lot of physical things that need to be done with somebody with a spinal cord injury. I would recommend that. Christopher Reeves Foundation was good. High Fives Foundation was super for people that are injured in a sports related injury. Motion Project is going to be out there. Craig Hospital has a lot of information, blogs, and documentation. I would definitely say Craig Hospital. Any of the spinal cord center hospitals have websites that it's devastating.
Right.
I knew nothing about spinal cord injuries until my son was injured. So
Right.
you have to throw yourself into it. Telling somebody that your son's a quad, I didn't want to hear the word at first. What does that mean? What is the rest of my life or his life going to be like? So there's a lot of information out there, and educate yourself. If you be an advocate for your child or relative, whoever it is, friend, whatever you can do to advocate for them.
Well, your son is definitely blessed to have the support system in both you and your husband, and also the whole Western New York. He's blessed to have that. Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. If this can in any way help other people who are going through this, I'll feel like it was a worthwhile story for others to hear. But I'm so sorry that you're going through this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Okay, so thank you. I'm just going to thank you for being here. And once again, this is International Psychic Medium Susan Schueler. Welcome to, we're just glad that you could be here, Fran. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.